Hello, dear students. Hope you all are doing fine and welcome back to the online studies. Today, in this session, we are going to begin a chapter from the book Flamingo, the chapter called The Rattrap, written by Selma Lagerlöf. The story The Rattrap is set amidst the mines of Sweden, which are rich in iron ore. The story is about a man who sold small rat traps of wire, and it conveys the idea that the whole world is nothing but a big rat trap. Through the metaphor of a rat trap, the author strikes a philosophic note and he describes the human predicament of temptation. The author has a firm belief that the essential goodness in a human being can be awakened through understanding and love. Dear students, there are some very important words that are used in the story. The first one is rat trapped itself, rat trapped, and it symbolizes, or the rat trap symbolizes the material world. And the second word which is very important in the story is kroner. Kroner or krona is a currency of Sweden and it symbolizes a beads. And the third one is that letter, So the letter symbolizes love and gratitude of Adla in the story. About the author. Selma Lagerlöf was born in 1858 and died in 1940. She was a Swedish writer whose stories have been translated into many languages. She published her first novel, Gösta Berling's Saga, at the age of 33, and she was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, which she was awarded in 1909. This story, The Rat Trap, is set in the middle of the mines of Sweden, which are rich in iron ore, and the story is narrated in the manner of a fairy tale. It gives us the message that the emotions of love and acceptance can reform others. Now let's read and explain the chapter. Once upon a time there was a man who went around selling small rat traps of wire. He made them himself at odd moments. Odd moments means a short period of free time. From the material he got by begging in the stores or at the big farms, but even so the business was not especially profitable. So he had to resort to both begging and pretty thievery to keep body and soul together. Even so, his clothes were in rags, his cheeks were sunken. Sunken means lowered. And hunger gleamed in his eyes. Gleamed means shone. Past participle of see. Shone. Once there was a man who used to sell small rat traps made of wire, and these rat traps were made by him in his free time. And he used to collect the material required by begging from stores or big farms, and still his business was not earning him any profits. So therefore he had to beg or steal in order to survive. His clothes were old and torn, his cheeks were lowered due to malnutrition, and one could easily see the hunger in his eyes. No one can imagine how sad and monotonous life can appear to such a vagabond who plods along the road left to his own meditations. But one day this man had fallen into a line of thought which really seemed to him entertaining. Monotonous means boring, vagabond means wanderer, and plods means walks heavily. Here the author is saying that the life of the rat trap seller was very sad and boring. He was homeless, and slowly, with heavy feet, he walked along the road, lost in his own thoughts, and but one day he got lost in a series of thoughts which he found very interesting. He had naturally been thinking of his rat traps when suddenly he was struck by the idea that the whole world about him, the whole world with its lands and seas, its cities and villages, was nothing but a big rat trap. It had never existed for any other purpose than to set baits for people. It offers riches and joys, shelter and food, heat and clothing, exactly as the rat trap offered cheese and pork. And as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed in on him, and then everything came to an end. Here, bait means a food placed on a hook to trap a rat, or here it is referred to the comforts of life which is offered to trap someone. Tempted means convinced. Here, the author is saying that the man was thinking about the rat trap, and suddenly a thought came to his mind that the whole world, which includes land, sea, cities, and villages, was similar to a rat trap. He thought that there was no meaning of the existence of this world. It was nothing but a temptation, just like cheese and pork, which we offer as bait to catch the rat. So, according to him, as soon as someone tries to comfort himself with joy, food, and shelter, he at once gets trapped into this rat trap, which is known as world. The world had, of course, never been very kind to him, so it gave him unusual joy to think ill of it in this way. It became a cherished pastime of his during many dreary ploddings to think of people he knew who had let themselves be caught in the dangerous snare, and of others who were still circling around the bait. Cherish means to love or protect, and dreary means dull, ploddings means work heavily, and snare means trapped. The author is saying that no one in the world had ever been kind to the rat trap seller, so he started thinking ill of others. It became a favorite pastime for him. During dull moments, these thoughts made him happy, so he continued with thinking ill of those who were known to him. He would imagine those people who were already trapped in the rat trap of worldly things, and also those who were about to get trapped in it. One dark evening, as he was trudging means walking slowly, trudging along the road, he caught sight of a little grey cottage by the roadside, and he knocked on the door to ask shelter for the night. Nor was he refused. Instead of the sour faces which ordinarily met him, the owner, who was an old man without wife or child, was happy to get someone to talk to in his loneliness. Immediately he put the porridge pot on the fire and gave him supper. Then he carved off such a big slice from his tobacco roll that it was enough both for the stranger's pipe and his own. Finally, he got out an old pack of cards and played muleys with his guests until bedtime. Muleys means a game played with playing cards. Here the author is saying that one evening the rat trap seller was walking very slowly. He saw a little grey cottage which stood by the road. He went up to the cottage and knocked at the door so as to get shelter for the night. Generally he was not helped by anyone, but this time he was welcomed by the old man into his cottage. He was a lonely old man without wife and kids. The old man was happy to get company that night. So the old man gave him some porridge to eat and then shared his tobacco with the guest. After they both played cards till bedtime. The old man was just as generous with his confidences as with his portraits and tobacco. The guest was informed at once that in his days of prosperity his host had been a crofter at Ramsjo Ironworks and had worked on the land. Now that he was no longer able to do day labor, it was his cow which supported him. Yes, that Bosie was extraordinary. She could give milk for the creamery every day, and last month he had received all of 30 kroner in payment. Generous means liberal, confidences here means secrets, prosperity means riches or richness, crofter means a person who works on a rented farm, bossy it's a Latin word bos used for a cow, and creamery means a factory that produces cheese and cream. Kroner means currency of Sweden. Here we can see that the Rattrap seller felt that the old man was not only liberal in sharing his portraits but also his secrets. He tells him that he was a rich man when he used to work on the rented farm. As he was old now and couldn't work, so he had to depend upon his cow for his living. The cow gave enough milk every day to be sold in the factory that produces cheese and cream. The old man said that he was able to earn 30 kroners last month because of the cow's milk. The stranger must have seemed incredulous, for the old man got up and went to the window, took down a leather pouch which hung on a nail in the very window frame, and picked out 3 wrinkled 10 kroner bills. These he held up before the eyes of his guest, nodding knowingly, and then stuffed them back into the pouch. Incredulous means unbelieving, and stuffed means to fill up with something. Here the author is saying that the Rattrap seller did not believe the old man's words that a cow could earn him so much. Therefore the old man took a leather pouch which hung on a window and took out 3 notes of 10 kroner each, which were old and crushed. He showed those currency notes to make him believe his words and then kept them back in the pouch. The next day both men got up in good season. The crofter was in a hurry to milk his cow, and the other man probably thought he should not stay in bed when the head of the house had gotten up. They left the cottage at the same time. The crofter locked the door and put the key in his pocket. The man with the rat traps said goodbye and thank you, and thereupon each went his own way. Here, in a good season means early enough or early in the morning. So the author is saying that next morning or the next morning, both the rat trap seller and the crofter woke up early, as the crofter was in a hurry to milk his cow. Even the rat trap seller felt that as the owner of the house had awakened, so he should also leave the bed. They both came out of the cottage at the same time. The old man locked the door and went to his work. The rat trap seller also thanked him and went his own way. But half an hour later, the rat trap peddler stood again before the door. He did not try to get in, however. He only went up to the window, smashed a pane, stuck in his hand, and got hold of the pouch with the 30 kroner. He took the money and thrust it into his own pocket. Then he hung the leather pouch very carefully back in its place and went away. Here petler means sailor, smash means badly broken. Here the author is saying that after about half an hour later, the rat trap seller returned to the cottage and he broke down the window pane where the pouch hung. He took away the money, kept it in his pocket, put the pouch back at its place and walked off or walked away. As he walked along with the money in his pocket, he felt quite pleased with his smartness. He realized, of course, that at first he dare not continue on the public highway but must turn off the road into the woods. During the first hours, this caused him no difficulty. Later in the day, it became worse, for it was a big and confusing forest which he had gotten into. He tried to be sure to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood, and finally he realized that he had only been walking around in the same part of the forest. Here the author is saying that the petler was quite happy as he had money in his pocket. He then thought of walking through the forest as it was unsafe to walk on the highway because he feared being caught. So initially it was not difficult to walk through the forest, but later on it got confusing for him as he forgot his way. He tried hard to walk in the right direction, but in vain, as he found himself at the same place again and again. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world and the Rattrap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by a bait and had been caught. The whole forest, with its trunks and branches, its thickest and fallen logs, closed in upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. Thickest means a dense group of bushes, and impenetrable means impassable. Here the author says that it was at this point of time the petler started thinking that now he himself was caught in the trap of the world just like other people. He was fooled by the bait of money which he had stolen from the old man's house. The forest seemed like a prison full of trunks and branches. It was like an impassable prison. It was late in December. Darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and increased also his gloom and despair. Gloom means dark and despair means hopelessness. Finally he saw no way out, and he sank down on the ground, tired to death, thinking that his last moment had come. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a hard, regular thumping. Thumping means the sound of some heavy object beating. There was no doubt as to what that was. He raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from an iron mill. He thought, there must be people nearby. He summoned means gathered. He summoned all his strength, got up and staggered. Staggered means to walk with difficulty, and staggered in the direction of the sound. Here we see that as it was the month of December, it got dark early. As it got dark, his hope of escaping the forest reduced. The danger to his life increased, and so did his feeling of being hopelessness. There was no way left for him. So he sat on the ground and was so tired and terrified that he thought this was his last moment and soon he would die. As he laid his head on the ground, he heard a very strong regular sound. It was a hard sound that was coming at the regular intervals. He soon realized that these sounds were the sounds of hammer strokes from an iron mill. He thought that he could find some people nearby. With this thought, he gathered some strength and started working with great difficulty towards the direction of the sound. The Ramsjo ironworks, which are now closed down, were not so long ago a large plant with smelted rolling mill and forge. Smelted means a machine in which metal is melted to form into a shape, and rolling mill means machine to roll metal into sheets, and forge means a shop where metal is heated. In the summer time, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slide down the canal, which led to a large inland lake, and in the winter time, the roads near the mill were black from all the coal dust which sifted down from the big charcoal crates. Here, barge means a long flat bottom boat for carrying freight on canals and rivers, and scow means a flat bottom boat used for transporting cargo to and from ships in harbor. Here the author is saying that the Ramsjo Iron Works was a large plant which had shut down few years ago. It had smelter, rolling mill and a forge. In summers, long flat bottom boats carrying the material would come down the canal, which led to a large inland lake for supplying material to the mill, and in winters the roads turned black because of the coal dust that came along due to the transportations of the charcoal crates. During one of the long dark evenings just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace, waiting for the crude iron which had been put in the fire to be ready to put on the anvil. Anvil means a heavy iron block with a flat top and concave sides. Every now and then one of them got up to steer the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments dripping with perspiration, though as was the custom he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. Perspiration means sweat. Here we can see that on one long dark evening near Christmas time, the master smith and his helper were sitting in the dark forge which was built near the furnace. He was wearing a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. Both of them were waiting for the pig iron which was put inside the furnace fire to be ready to put onto the anvil. Anvil is a heavy block with flat top which is used to shape the metals. They took turns to stir the liquid which was very hot. As they could bear the heat for a few minutes, each of them would return sweating profusely. All the time there were many sounds to be heard in the forts. The big bellows groaned and the burning coal cracked. The fire boy shoveled charcoal into the mouth of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whinnied the rain against the brick tile roof. Here bellows means air bag that emits a stream of air used for blowing air into a fire, and shovel means move or pushed, maw means jaws, and clatter means bang, and whim means beaten with a whim. Here it means it refers to hit something. Here the author says that one could hear different types of sounds in the forge. There was a big bellow which was blowing air in the fire with great sound. Also there was the sound of cracking coal, and one could also hear the bang of the charcoal which was being shoveled by the fire boy. Also the sounds which were coming from outside the mill, and these were of the waterfall and the high speed north wind which hit the raindrops against the brick tile roof. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith did not notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge until he stood close up to the furnace. Here we see that it was due to these different types of sounds that the blacksmith didn't realize that a man had opened the gate of the forge and had entered till he came and stood near the furnace. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light which escaped through the sooty panes, and to come in to warm themselves in front of the fire. The blacksmiths glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rattraps dangling on his chest. Sooty panes means black powder produced when coiled or wood is burned. Here the author says that many homeless people used to get attracted to the lights of the forts which peeked through the window panes which were covered with the black powder of burned coal. They would seek shelter there. They would warm themselves with the help of the burning fire. As the blacksmiths were accustomed to visitors, they were indifferent to the man. They just looked at him. The Rattrap seller's appearance was similar to that of other wanderers. He had a long beard, was dirty, wore old, worn-out clothes, and had a bunch of rattraps hanging from his chest. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded a haughty consent without honoring him with a single word. Haughty means arrogant. Here the author says that the petler tried to seek permission from the blacksmith so that he could stay in the forge for a night. The blacksmith allowed the petler with an arrogant consent by just nodding and didn't say a single word to him. The tramp did not say anything either. He had not come there to talk but only to warm himself and sleep. In those days, the Ramsjo iron mill was owned by a very prominent iron master whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see that the work was done as well as possible, and at this very moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. Here prominent means important and tramp means vagabond or wanderer. Further, we see that the petler also said nothing because his main aim was to warm himself and sleep. The owner of Ramsjo's iron mill in those days was a very ambitious person whose aim was to sell only the finest iron into the market. Therefore, he used to keep a check on the workers both during the night and the day. The owner was on a night inspection visit when the petler entered the forge. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. Ragamuffin means a person in rags. The iron master did not follow the example of the blacksmiths who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. Deign means do something that one considers to be beneath one's dignity. He walked close up to him, looked him over very carefully, and then tore off his slouched hat to get a better view of his face. Slouched hat means hat band on one side of the head. Here the author says that unlike the blacksmiths, the iron master at once noticed the petler who was sitting so close to the furnace that steam was coming out of his torn clothes. He not only went near him but also removed the wanderer's hat that was bent to one side so that he could see the man's face clearly. "But of course it is you, Nils Olof," he said. "How do you look?" The man with the rat traps had never before seen the iron master at Ramsjo and did not even know what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. Therefore, he did not want to undeceive him all at once. Here, acquaintance means associate. Undeceive means to tell someone that his belief is mistaken. Here we see that when the iron master took off the peddler's hat, he mistook him as an old acquaintance, Nils Olof. The peddler didn't know him, nor had he seen this man before, but he thought that if this man mistook him as his old companion and gave him some money out of pity, then it would be a good thing. Therefore, he didn't let him know that he had mistaken him as Nils Olof. Yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me, he said. You should not have resigned from the regiment, said the iron master. That was the mistake. If only I had still been in the service at the time, it never would have happened. Well, now of course, you will come home with me. Here, downhills means worst. Regiment is a unit in the army or defense force. Here it is clear that the peddler started a conversation with the iron master by saying that things didn't went well with him. To this the iron master replied that he had made a big mistake by leaving the regiment. He also added that if he would have been working in the regiment when he resigned, he wouldn't have let him do so. Later on, he or the iron master invited the peddler to his home to go along up to the manor's house and be received by the owner like an old regimental comrade. That, however, did not please the tramp. No, I couldn't think of it, he said, looking quite alarmed. He thought of the 30 kroner. To go up to the manor's house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into the lion's den. He only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forts and then sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. Here, manor's house means a large country house, and comrade means a fellow soldier here, and alarm means frightened. Inconspicuously means invisible or which is not noticeable. Further, it is clear that the Rattrap seller didn't find it to be a good idea to visit the iron master's place or house. He was frightened with the idea of visiting to the large house of an old soldier, which according to him was not safe. After all, he had the stolen money with him. He didn't want to put himself in danger. His intentions were to sleep in the forts and then go away from there without even being noticed. The iron master assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing. Please don't think that I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there, he said. Elizabeth is dead. As you may already have heard, my boys are abroad and there is no one at home except my oldest daughter and myself. We were just saying that it was too bad we didn't have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help us make the Christmas food disappear a little faster. Here we see that the iron master was aware of his friend's miserable condition. So he tried to make him comfortable by saying that he should feel free to come his home as his home was an ordinary one. And also he told him that his wife was no more and added that he must be aware of this. Then he let him know that both his sons were settled abroad. Only he and his daughter were left at home. He invited him to celebrate Christmas with his family, so that he and his daughter may have some good company at the Christmas feast. But the stranger said no and again no, and the ironmaster saw that he must give in. It looks as though Captain von Stelle preferred to stay with you tonight, Stenstrom, he said to the master blacksmith, and turned on his heel. Here we see that though the ironmaster made many attempts to invite him, the petler didn't accept his invitation. So at last he says to the blacksmith, Stenstrom, that it seemed that Captain von Stelle, the petler, wanted to stay with him in the forts. But he laughed to himself as he went away, and the blacksmith, who knew him, understood very well that he had not said his last word. Here we can understand that he laughed and went away, but the blacksmith knew that he was hiding something. It was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of carriage wheels outside the forts, and a new guest came in. But this time it was not the ironmaster. He had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. Here the author says that after a gap of half an hour, the ironmaster sent his daughter. He hoped that his daughter may bring his friend home, as he believed that she was better in persuading others. She entered, followed by a valet. Valet means personal attendant, carrying on his arm a big fur coat. She was not at all pretty, but seemed modest. Modest means humble, and quite shy. In the forts, everything was just as it had been earlier in the evening. The master blacksmith and his apprentice means learner or student, still sat on their bench, and iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of pig iron under his head and his hat pulled down over his eyes. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his head. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye opened. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. Here the author is saying that the ironmaster's daughter entered the mill with her attendant, who was carrying a big fur coat. She was a humble girl who was very shy. When she entered, everyone was busy the same way as they had been earlier. The blacksmith was still sitting on the bench with his trainees and was working on the iron. She went up to the petler and lifted his head. The petler slept with one eye open, and as soon as he saw her, he got shocked and jumped up. "My name is Ethla Wilmanson," said the young girl. "My father came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forts tonight, and then I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I'm so sorry, Captain, that you are having such a hard time." Here we see that the ironmaster's daughter introduced herself as Ethla Wilmanson and was sorry to hear about the hard times that the petler was facing. She explained to him that she had come to take him home with her father's permission. So dear students, that's the end of the first part of the chapter, the Rattrap, and very soon we will come up with the second part. Hope you understood the lesson. Thank you.